When you look into the world's most infamous motorcycle gangs, the Hells Angels stand out as a sign of freedom, rebellion, and sometimes trouble. But what happens when the wild souls of these leather-clad icons meet the prison walls and iron bars? Today, we're going to talk about the hellish lives of Hells Angels bosses that have never been told before. Do they still have power? Or do their leather wings get taken away by the system? Ralph "Sonny" Barger is the most famous member of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. His name is revered and criticized in the biker community and beyond. Barger's charisma and ability to lead brought the Hells Angels to the attention of people all over the world, making them the most famous symbol of the motorbike counterculture. But along the way, he ran into trouble with the law several times, which put his leadership skills, grit, and understanding of how biker loyalty works in prison to the test. In the early 1970s, Barger got his first serious prison term when he was found guilty of drug crimes. During this time, Barger first encountered the prison system, which was very different from the freedom of the open road and the company he had built. Barger found himself in a new world inside, one where the rules of the outside world didn't apply, and his image both led and followed him. Unfortunately, Barger's impact did not lessen while he was in jail. Reports and stories from other prisoners and jail staff show that he got through prison life with a mix of respect, strategy, and a strong sense of who he was. Barger was known for standing up for the rights of prisoners, talking to prison officials about how to make things better, and following a strict code of behavior that showed he was a good leader. There were times when he thought about things and learned new things while he was in jail. While he was in jail, Barger wrote parts of his autobiography in which he talked about his beliefs and life events. This made him even more famous, both inside and outside of the biker community. He was able to adapt and find a sense of meaning in even the most difficult situations through this project. The way jail life works also showed how much respect Barger had among his fellow prisoners. Even though there was a chance for rivalry and conflict, he was often seen as a figure of power and wisdom. This showed how good a leader he was, as he was respected by everyone in the prison. Barger's relationship with the police was complicated. There was some mutual respect, but there was also strain. Because he was the leader of the Hells Angels, he was always being watched. But because of how he behaved and tried to solve problems inside the prison, people reluctantly acknowledged his leadership and impact. When Barger got out of jail, his experiences there made him even more of a symbol of strength and determination. It says a lot about his character and the unbreakable spirit of the Hells Angels that he was able to handle the trials of prison life, keep his leadership role, and come out with his principles intact. Barger's story is an interesting look at how people can change, lead, and stay alive in the prison system. It shows how hard it is to keep your identity and power when you don't have the freedom and unity that make biker life what it is. He was one of the most famous people in motorcycle club history, and his life, both inside and outside of jail, shows how influential he was. Anyone would find jail hard to deal with, but for the bosses of the Hells Angels, a notorious motorcycle gang with chapters all over the world, this reality comes with its own set of challenges and ways of dealing with them. Their lives change dramatically when they go from being free on the open road to being locked up in a cell. This shows how strong, powerful, and vulnerable these powerful people are. Different prison systems around the world treat their prisoners in different ways, but when it comes to handling well-known gang leaders, they all use a mix of respect, caution, and strict control. Bosses of the Hells Angels are often kept in high-security areas where they are watched at all times. For two reasons: to keep them from running gang business while they're locked up, and to keep them safe from rival gang members who might see their time in jail as a chance to settle scores. A lot of Hells Angels bosses end up in separate cells or solitary confinement soon after they are arrested. This separation serves as both a safety measure to stop gang-related violence and a way to limit their power over other people. These leaders' mental toughness is put to the test when they are alone. When they are taken away from the places they know and the company of their brothers, they have to deal with being alone, which is very different from the social and busy lives they used to have. Hells Angels bosses often find ways to keep their power even when they are physically separated. Letters, carefully listened to phone calls, and trips to prisons become very important ways to talk to each other. They can still give advice to their gang, send messages, and even plan actions that happen outside of prison through these channels. They have great leadership skills and their members are very loyal, which shows that they can keep some control and impact over things. Inside the jail, the social order is a complicated web of friendships, rivalries, and changes in power. Because they are well known and have led others before, Hell's Angels bosses often use a unique mix of tact and force to get through this situation. They can be very important to the jail economy because they trade goods and services and sometimes help settle arguments between prisoners. Their image often comes before them, giving them respect and authority that they can use to their benefit or sometimes draw unwanted attention from competitors. A boss of the Hells Angels who is in jail has a hard time every day. Aside from losing their freedom, they also have to deal with the constant threat of violence, the mental effects of being alone, and the fight to keep their identity in a place that is meant to erase it. Various ways of coping exist. Some go deeper into schooling by taking classes or reading a lot. Some people find comfort in exercise, which they use to deal with worry and keep their strength up. Religion or spirituality can also give you peace and a sense of purpose in the middle of the chaos of prison life. When a Hells Angels boss goes to jail, it can have an effect on the rest of the gang's activities, morale, and the balance of power. But it's not unusual for these leaders to keep having a big impact even while they're in jail. When people are locked up, the choices they make there can affect the whole gang, their businesses, and even their ties with other criminal groups. This long-lasting effect shows how loyal Hells Angels members are to their bosses, and how important these bosses are to the gang's structure. Hells Angels bosses in jail have to change in order to stay alive. They have to deal with the complicated politics of prison, take care of their physical and mental health, and handle their ties with both other prisoners and guards. Their ability to bounce back from problems often boosts their standing in the gang. Their time served becomes a badge of honor that shows how dedicated and strong they are. For Hells Angels bosses, getting out of jail is a big deal. It's not just going back to freedom, they're going back into a world that may have changed a lot while they were gone. The problem then is not only getting used to life outside of the gang, but also getting back into their old role within it. Going to prison can change their views, how they lead, and their goals, which can have an effect on both their own lives and the future of the Hells Angels. Hells Angels bosses' lives behind bars are a complicated patchwork of being alone, being influenced, being challenged, and adapting. The things that happen to them show how power, loyalty, and toughness work in one of the most notorious biker gangs in the world. George Christie, who used to be head of the Ventura chapter of the Hells Angels, was locked up and spent some time in solitary confinement. As Christie has talked about in interviews and in his book, his time in jail shows how being alone can affect a person's mental health. Even though things were hard for him, he used his time to write and think about his life. This helped him become an author and public speaker after he got out of jail. In spite of all the problems she faced, Christie's story shows that people can change significantly. A member of the Hells Angels and an actor on the TV show Sons of Anarchy, David LaBrava, has talked freely about the realities of biker life and its consequences, such as legal problems and the possibility of going to jail. His thoughts give us a unique look into the culture of motorbike clubs and what it's like to live on the edge of what's legal. In Canada, several Hells Angels members have been in high-profile court cases that ended with them going to jail. The cases often show how the activities of the club clash with attempts by the police to stop organized crime. These members' time in prison has had different effects on their personal lives and the club's work in the area. Some use their time there to rethink their plans, while others stay involved with the club and use their power there. Bosses of the Hells Angels often cause changes in the club's structure, changing who is in charge and how much power each chapter has. People outside the group don't always notice these changes, but it's important to know how it adapts and changes to meet the needs of its members. The stories of people who have done time show not only their own journeys, but also how strong the club's culture is and how well it can handle the law. A number of former Hells Angels members have talked about how their time in jail helped them think about and change their lives. For some, the experience leads to big changes in their lives, like leaving the club and focusing on recovery and campaigning instead. These stories are important lessons that individuals can change and grow, even when things don't seem likely to do so. Putting Hells Angels leaders and members in jail has bigger effects on the club and how it interacts with society as a whole. It makes you think about what justice is, how people can change, and what part these kinds of groups play in their communities. The personal stories of people who have been to prison shed light on these complicated problems by showing what it's really like for real people. There is no doubt that having bosses from the Hells Angels in prison changes the way people are locked up. This changes not only the environment inside the prison, but also how people think about both the gang and the criminal justice system outside of prison. The fact that these people are in jail changes the power, authority, and social structure in the prison community in complicated ways. When the leader of the Hells Angels arrives at a jail, it's a big deal. These people can get respect and power from other prisoners because they are known for being leaders and often having great authority. Their name precedes them, which makes people feel both amazed and tense. As current prisoner hierarchies change to make room for these new, well-known inmates, the balance of power can change. This change can make power structures more stable, as Hells Angels bosses often settle disagreements or keep things quiet, but it can also cause fights, especially between members of rival gangs who are also in jail. They have a lot of power in the unofficial economy of jail life, where they can be very important in the trade of goods and services. The Hells Angels network, which can reach all over the world, can give them resources and ties that boost their status within the group. This network not only helps them get used to life in prison, but it also lets them keep some of their outside impact. The bosses of Hells Angels and prison officials have a complicated connection. They respect each other, are careful with each other, and sometimes fight. The authorities are very aware that these prisoners could cause problems in the jail or continue committing crimes while they are locked up. Because people are more aware of this, there is often more surveillance and restrictions, such as limits on visitors and contact. However, the charisma and leadership skills that make these bosses famous can also be used to work out a deal with jail staff that keeps everyone happy. Other prisoners may find it interesting and respectable to be around a Hells Angels boss. These bosses usually live by a code of respect and loyalty that can make other prisoners loyal, even if they are not in the same gang. This impact can help inmates feel like they are part of a community and keep things running smoothly, but it can also make gang rivalries and other problems worse inside the prison. Putting Hells Angels leaders in jail has effects that go beyond prison walls. They change how people think about motorcycle gangs and how well the criminal justice system works against organized crime. The fact that they are in jail shows the people that police are serious about stopping crime. It does, however, bring up questions about punishment and rehabilitation, especially for people whose identities are so closely linked to their habits and groups they belong to. The stories they tell about how they changed, adapted, and were influenced while they were in jail add to the mythology surrounding the Hells Angels. These stories can make them seem more human or more evil, based on the point of view they are told from. There are two effects on society. Some see their imprisonment as a win for law and order, while others see it as proof of how strong they are and how long they have been brothers. Bosses of the Hells Angels who are in jail show how complicated the relationship is between individual choice, institutional authority, and group identity. How does the way these people were treated and behaved while they were in jail show how society as a whole feels about crime, justice, and redemption? The power they have inside, and the way people see them outside, make us think about whether our jail systems are just places to lock people up or places where people can change. What most people think of the Hells Angels and other similar biker gangs is very mixed. On the one hand, these people are often idealized as modern-day rebels who stand for freedom and not fitting in. Many people admire the tough individualism shown in their stories, which are full of tales of brotherhood, loyalty, and resistance against authority. If anything, though, their illegal activities, violent encounters, and the court cases that led to their incarceration paint a scarier picture, supporting ideas that they are lawless and dangerous. The fact that leaders of the Hells Angels are in jail adds to both of these stories and has become a topic of public discussion about crime, punishment, and the thin line between being heroic and being bad. When the news talks about their trials and sentences, it often focuses on the illegal parts of their lives, making the complex social bonds and rules of honor that make them who they are seem less important. This can change how people think about motorcycle gangs, making them seem like simple criminal groups instead of complex subcultures with their own traditions and beliefs. The Hells Angels and other motorcycle gangs are facing a difficult future because of changed social norms, growing legal pressures, and changes in the way organized crime works. It is very important for leaders in these groups to be able to handle these changes, whether they are in jail or not. Interestingly, putting people in jail has both weakened and strengthened these gangs. It takes away important people from the day-to-day activities, but it often makes their mythos stronger, making them more of a martyr or hero in their communities. What the future holds for biker gangs depends on new technologies, changes in the law, and shifting public views on crime and recovery. Some of these groups are changing, and some are turning to more complex types of crime. Other groups are trying to become more legitimate by doing good deeds and public relations efforts to change their bad reputation. The heads of these gangs, both now and in the future, will play a big part in where they go. Will they stick to the off-the-books customs of the past, or will they look for a new identity in a world where the lines between the mainstream and the fringes are becoming less clear? The fact that their bosses are in jail has also made the gangs rethink their internal structures. To lessen the effects of future court challenges, they may move toward more decentralized leadership models. This change could affect how these groups work, both legally and socially, which could affect how long they last and how useful they are in the 21st century. The stories of Hells Angels bosses who are in jail help us look at bigger problems in society, like why we're so interested in criminals, how hard it is to help criminals get better, and how organized crime is changing over time. Though these stories are still going on, they make us think about how we think about biker gangs and their place in society. The legacies of these groups' leaders and the changing world around them will have an impact on their futures, which makes us think about what the criminal motorcycle gang's future holds in this time of unimaginable change.
When it comes to sneaky motorcycle gangs, the Hells Angels stand out because their reputation is a mix of myth and harsh truth. Since its start in the 1940s, when it was just after World War II, this organization has grown from a small group of motorbike fans to a worldwide criminal group. But behind the leather jackets, loud engines, and well-known death's head symbols is a complicated story of breaking the law and not following social rules. In this movie, we look at 10 of the most violent crimes connected to the Hells Angels. These are the crimes that made them famous. In April 2002, a fight broke out in the normally calm town of Laughlin, Nevada. It showed how dangerous rivalries are within outlaw biker gangs. At the heart of this storm were the Hells Angels and the Mongols Motorcycle Club, who have been rivals for a long time. The fight happened at the River Run Motorcycle Rally, which is held every year and brings together bikers from all over the country. The fighting started inside Harrah's Laughlin Casino, which was a shocking place for people who were just passing by. What started out as a verbal argument quickly turned into a full-on fight with guns and physical violence. 3 bikers were killed, and several others were hurt in the fight, which cast a long shadow over the motorbike community. There were direct fights between members of both the Hells Angels and the Mongols. The fights were over territory, and who would be the leader among the illegal biker clubs in the United States. The fight didn't just happen. It was caused by rising tensions and a fight over who would run profitable criminal businesses. Following the incident, many bikers from both clubs were arrested, and the casino's security video was very important in the court case. The event not only made things worse between the Hells Angels and the Mongols, but it also made the police pay close attention to both groups. Communities that hold motorbike rallies started to rethink how they handle security and how welcoming they are to motorcycle clubs. People who were involved were charged with everything from murder to crime. A number of Hells Angels members were facing long prison terms, but later appeals and plea deals changed some of the results. The trial was a show, which brought attention to how hard it is to prosecute organized crime that is tied to illegal motorcycle gangs. It shows how hard it is to find a balance between the freedoms that come with motorbike culture and the risks that come with its more dangerous parts. This incident also shows how hard it is for law enforcement to deal with organized crime in these groups. It calls into question the usefulness of current strategies and the need for new ones in the fight against outlaw motorcycle gang violence. The province of Quebec in Canada was in the middle of a terrible war from 1994 to 2002. It was called the Quebec Biker War. This violent fight was between the Hells Angels and their rivals, the Rock Machine. They were fighting over drug trafficking lines. The war is one of the bloodiest in the history of fights between motorbike gangs. It caused a lot of damage to both the bikers and people who were just watching. Two sides of the Quebec Biker War fought to be the most powerful in Quebec's criminal underworld. There were bombings, shootings, and deaths. Over 160 people were killed in the battle. Some of them were innocent people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the late 1990s, when the violence was at its worst, both gangs were using more and more cruel methods. The most important groups were the Hells Angels and the Rock Machine. They were fighting because they wanted to control Quebec's rich drug market. Personal grudges and the desire for revenge also contributed to the war, as each act of violence led to a stronger reaction from the other side. The Quebec Biker War changed the way people in Canada felt about motorbike gangs and how safe they thought the public was. It caused big changes in how Canadian police deal with organized crime. For example, anti-gang laws were passed, and police units that specialize in gang operations were given more resources. The war also hurt the social structure of the areas it touched, making people afraid and suspicious of each other. When the Quebec Biker War was over, Canadian authorities cracked down hard on biker gangs. Operation Springtime 2001 was a major police operation that caught and convicted over 150 gang members, including high-level Hells Angels members. Key members of both gangs were given long prison terms as a result of these court cases, which were a turning point in Canada's fight against organized crime. This part of history also shows how important it is for law enforcement to keep working together to break up these networks and bring peace back to communities that have been harmed. In September 2011, there was a deadly shootout at a Nevada casino. It was a scary reminder of how unstable outlaw biker gangs can be. The Hells Angels and the Vagos Biker Club got into a fight, which made things worse between the two groups and shed light on the ongoing fight for territory and power across the United States. The fight happened at the Street Vibrations motorcycle gathering in Sparks, Nevada. Biker fans come from all over the country to attend this event. The fight started in the casino as a fight, but quickly turned into gunfire, which killed a Hells Angels chapter head and hurt several others. With so many people watching, the casino floor turned into a crazy, violent mess. Members of both the Hells Angels and the Vagos were directly involved. The fighting was caused by a long-running feud and disagreements over who should be in charge of illegal activities, like selling drugs and weapons. There is still disagreement about what started the shooting, but most people agree that it started as a territorial fight that got out of hand. The Nevada casino shootout had a big effect on the community. More security was put in place at biker events, and people became more aware of the risk of violence between gangs. The situation also made police pay more attention to motorcycle gangs, which is part of a larger plan to keep an eye on them and step in to stop more violence. Afterward, several gang members were caught and charged with a range of crimes, such as murder, attack, and weapons offenses. The court case showed a complicated web of rivalries and ties between motorcycle gangs, and those found guilty were given harsh sentences. The trial also showed how hard it is to prosecute organized crime, because biker gangs are very close, and members often don't talk about their crimes. In March 2001, at Copenhagen Airport in Denmark, one of the most shocking things that happened with the Hells Angels outside of the United States happened. This violent fight between the Bandidos and the Hells Angels, another well-known biker gang, showed how these groups and their rivalries can be felt all over the world. They got into a fight at Copenhagen Airport, but it was part of a bigger fight called the Great Nordic Biker War, which happened all through the 1990s. Airports are usually places where people meet and say goodbye, but they turned into a place where people got violent. The fighting started out of the blue, and both gangs used guns. Members of both gangs were seriously hurt. The people who took part were from the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, two gangs that have a history of fighting each other violently. At the time of the fight, there were ongoing disagreements over land and control of illegal businesses, especially the lucrative drug trade in Scandinavia. The event at Copenhagen Airport was a stark example of these underlying issues. The fight changed how people in Scandinavia thought about motorcycle gangs and led to calls for stricter rules and more police action against these groups. It also showed how hard it is to police foreign criminal groups that work across borders without being caught. After the fight at the airport, the Danish government launched a large police raid that went after both gangs. A number of gang members were caught and charged with violence-related crimes. After that, the trial showed how serious the Danish judicial system was about fighting organized crime, and they set a standard for future actions against motorcycle gangs. The Hells Angels were blamed for the lynching of a rival gang member in Montreal, which was one of the worst events in Canadian motorbike gang history. This event was not only a turning point in the ongoing war between motorcycle gangs in Canada, but it also showed how brutally people in the criminal underground try to stay in charge. The event happened in the late 1990s, when the Hells Angels and other biker gangs in Quebec were fighting over territory and were very competitive with each other. The victim, a member of a rival gang, was taken hostage and beaten badly to show strength and fear. This violent act wasn't an isolated one. It was part of a larger pattern of revenge and power struggles among criminal bikers. Members of the Hells Angels gang were directly involved because they wanted to show they were better than other gangs and keep control of illegal businesses, especially drug dealing. People were warned by the lynching that going against the Hells Angels' power would lead to bad things. This event had a huge impact, making people very angry and bringing more attention from the police to the actions of motorcycle gangs. It made clear how violent these gangs were willing to get in order to keep criminal operations under control. A lot of people also talked about how better ways are needed to fight organized crime and keep communities safe from violent acts like this. As a result of the lynching, Canadian officials stepped up their efforts to crack down on motorcycle gangs. Key Hells Angels members were arrested and are now being charged. The legal processes showed how the gang worked and how it was involved in many illegal activities. The people who were involved got sentences that showed how seriously the court system took violent acts like these. The lynching in Montreal is a stark reminder of how violent gang competition can be, and how far these groups will go to show who is in charge. It shows how important it is for police to be alert and strong in their efforts to break up criminal networks and keep people safe from the dangers of organized crime. A shocking act of violence happened on Nevada's freeways, showing how dangerous the rivalries between biker gangs in the US can be. Members of the Hells Angels and the Vagos Motorcycle Club got into a fight on the highway, which quickly turned into a high-speed shootout. This shows how unstable gang relationships can be and how dangerous they are to public safety. Summary of the event. It happened in the middle of the 2010s, when tensions between the Hells Angels and the Vagos were high. Both gangs are known for doing a lot of illegal things, and they fought on a busy Nevada road. During the fight, gunfire was fired between moving cars, which was a careless act that put not only the gang members involved in danger, but also many innocent drivers and passengers. Participants and reasons. The people who took part were members of the Hells Angels and the Vagos. There was a conflict because the two groups were fighting over territory, respect, and control of crime businesses. These gangs are ready to take huge risks to show who is in charge, even though these kinds of freeway encounters don't happen very often. Results and effects. The shooting on the freeway had direct effects on Nevadans and the police who worked in the area. A lot of police action was taken, like highway patrols and investigations, to make sure the public wasn't put in any more risk. People became more aware of the presence and activities of motorcycle gangs in the area after the event. This led to calls for stricter measures to be taken to track and limit their movements. What happened in court? After the shooting, several gang members were caught and charged with attempted murder, assault with a dangerous weapon, and endangering public safety. The cases that followed showed how hard it is to bring criminal groups that move around a lot and keep their activities secret. It was clear that the results showed that the justice system was serious about holding people responsible for violent and careless actions. The goal of Operation Black Biscuit, a groundbreaking police operation, was to find and stop the Hells Angels' illegal actions. In the early 2000s, this operation was one of the biggest and most successful ones the ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, has ever done to get inside the mind of a criminal biker gang. The plan was started because the Hells Angels were becoming more powerful and committing more crimes, especially in Arizona. They went undercover to get the gang members to believe them. One of them was Jay Dobbins, who would later write a book about his experiences. Over the course of 2 years, these agents found a wide range of illegal actions, from selling drugs to selling weapons. ATF officers and Hells Angels members were the main ones who took part. The operation's goal was to get proof that could help bring charges against the gang and weaken its organization and operations. To the Hells Angels, their actions were motivated by making money and keeping their power in the criminal underground. The important thing about Operation Black Biscuit was that it showed how pretty and varied the Hells Angels' crime activities were. Many gang members were arrested and charged as a result of the operation, which hurt their activities in several states. In addition, it showed that police could easily get inside organized crime groups that are very secretive. At the end of the operation, people were raided and arrested on charges ranging from murder to crime. Some people didn't like that the operation didn't lead to more top leaders being convicted, but it did lead to major legal actions against many members. The proof gathered during the operation helped police plan future operations and gave detectives important information about what the gang was doing. The story of Operation Black Biscuit shows how hard and dangerous it can be for police to work undercover, especially in highly organized crime groups like the Hells Angels. Several organized crime groups, including the Hells Angels, fought in the Vancouver gang war. It was a rough time in British Columbia's past. During the late 2000s and early 2010s, this conflict was marked by brutal violence, public shootings, and the targeting of both rival gang members and innocent bystanders. This shows how dangerous gang impact can be in Canada. The main reason for the war was that the Hells Angels and other gangs were competing for control of the rich drug trade in British Columbia. There were a lot of shootings and murders during the war, and people in Vancouver and the surrounding areas were afraid. The execution-style killings and public shootouts brought gang violence in Canada to the public's attention in a way that had never been seen before. Along with other organized crime groups, the Hells Angels were very important to the war. The violence was caused by people wanting to control drug delivery routes, fighting over territory, and getting back at people they thought had hurt them or betrayed them in the criminal underworld. People in the area were deeply affected by the Vancouver gang war, which led to more police presence and calls for action against gang violence. It showed how hard it was for police to fight organized crime, and how important it was to have complete plans that included working with the community, gathering information, and working together across agencies. In reaction to the gang war, the police started a number of programs and operations meant to stop the Hells Angels and their rivals from doing what they were doing. Many people were arrested and found guilty on charges ranging from drug trafficking to murder because of these attempts. During the court cases, assets linked to criminal activity were also seized. However, the fight against organized crime in the area is still going on. During this time of conflict, people are also thinking about the larger social and economic issues that encourage people to join gangs and commit crimes. This calls for more comprehensive methods to preventing crime and helping people who have done wrong. Going to the Altamont Free Concert in 1969 was one of the most famous things that happened with the Hells Angels. Even though it wasn't a standard crime, the Altamont tragedy showed how dangerous rock music, drugs, and the counterculture movement of the 1960s could be together. The Hells Angels were very important in what happened. The Altamont Free Concert, which had big bands like the Rolling Stones, was meant to be the West Coast version of Woodstock. It was a bad idea to hire the Hells Angels as event security, as things turned out badly. A young concertgoer named Meredith Hunter died at the Altamont Speedway in Northern California, where the concert was held. Several other people were seriously hurt. Some accounts say that the Hells Angels were at the concert to provide protection in exchange for beer, but their aggressive behavior and general lack of discipline made the environment hostile. The tragedy happened because of a lot of misunderstandings, bad planning, and the fact that the show was a very unstable place. The Altamont shooting was the last act of the hippie era in the 1960s. It showed the dark side of a movement that had been all about love and peace. Many people didn't agree with the decision to hire the Hells Angels as protection, and security at big public events was looked at again. After Altamont, there were court cases connected to the violence, such as the trial of Hells Angels members. But because the case was so complicated and the event was so disorganized, it was hard for the law to find an answer. People are still arguing about and studying what happened in terms of the culture of the 1960s. The tragedy at the Altamont Free Concert shows how dangerous it can be to mix unstable things without proper planning or supervision. It shows how unpredictable things can get when countercultural ideas meet reality, as well as the duties of those who act in positions of power or control when this happens. Altamont's impact still affects how public events are protected and planned, stressing how important it is for everyone to be safe and treated with respect.